Life and Struggle. Autobiography of Badshah Khan in Bengal. After a few days in Varda, I went to Calcutta where the corporation gave me a warm reception. I had the impression that many Muslims had settled in Bengal and that they were politically backward. So I thought that I should do something for them and I gave several lectures in Calcutta. In my talks, I told the Muslims, I have come here to be of service to you. I really want to work for the villages because that is where the most miserable people live. There was a Muslim society in Calcutta of which Soharwardi and some other Muslims like him were also members. Instead of helping me to visit the Bengali villages, these Muslims did all that they could to stop me going there because they were afraid they would lose their own leadership. I was very disappointed with these Muslims. But then Professor Prafulla Chandra Ghosh, who was a friend of mine and a member of the Congress Working Committee, said that he would take me to these villages. But he added, there is no life in Muslim villages. I was glad that the Bengali was going with me, for the people in the village knew only Bengali and I could not speak Bengali. Prafulla Babu took me to many villages, and wherever we went, I started my work in usual way. I talked to the people. I told them that India used to be a land of gold, that there used to be plenty of milk and ghee in every house and rice in abundance. How was it then? I asked them that today they were undernourished and naked. Why? I asked the villagers who were listening with great interest. Why are you so poor today? Then I explained that as long as the country was not free, as long as they themselves did not hold the reins of the country, they would never be able to fill their stomachs. Having talked to the people like this for a few days, I held a public meeting. About 50 people came to hear what I had to say. But the second meeting, a few days later, was attended by 200 villagers. More and more people came to the meetings after that. Meanwhile, the date of Congress session in Bombay was drawing near and we had to leave. I told Prafulla Babu that these villages were by no means dead. It only needed someone to light up the spark of life, and that was still alive. Truth is crime. While I was in Bombay, I was invited to lecture at the Indian Christian Association. At the meeting, I was asked about the Khudai Khidmatgars, and I told the audience the history of our movement and all that had happened to me. Until then, I had not been aware that according to the British law, it was a crime to speak the truth. I was to find that out soon. When the Congress was over, I returned to Varda and started making plans for another trip to Bengal. I had decided that as long as the government did not give me permission to return to the frontier province, I would work in the villages in Bengal. When the government found out what I was planning to do, they decided to stop me going to Bengal, for they knew that the Bengali Hindus were already wide awake politically and they were afraid that I would wake up the Muslims too. Then they would lose their hold on the Bengal province altogether. So they sent the police and I was arrested again and sentenced to 2 years imprisonment. This sentence was actually the government's revenge on me for the lecture I had delivered at the Christian Association in Bombay. I was first sent to a Bombay prison but later transferred to Sabarmati prison. The British superintendent of this prison was a very strict officer. I was locked up in a ward and even the guard was not allowed to come in. The door was locked from the outside. I was not given any kind of food that I was entitled to. I was supposed to be a B class prisoner, but the food I was given was akin to that given to C class prisoners in my province. There were no charpais for the B class prisoners and I had to sleep on the floor. I had nobody to talk to, but there were lots of monkeys and I used to play with them. Then I fell seriously ill with influenza. Nobody thought of taking me to the hospital or even giving me a charpai. I still had to lie on the hard cement floor. However, by the grace of God, I was restored to health once again. Later, Sophia came to see me, and then Gandhiji also came, and through his efforts, I was promoted as an A class prisoner. But though I was now entitled to better food, there was no one to cook for me. Then the Inspector General of Prisons, who was on a tour of the prisons, came to see me. I requested him first of all to send me a cook. I knew a convict cook in Bombay who would do very well, I told him. I also told him that the climate there did not suit me and I wished to be transferred. The Inspector General happened to be a very kind man. He had lived in the frontier province too. He promised to get me transferred to Punjab and to get me a Pathan cook from Peshawar. I told him over and over again that the Punjab government would not want me there and that I would prefer to have that cook from Bombay. But the inspector still thought it would be nicer for me to be in Punjab as it was nearer to home. And he thought that a Pathan cook would be more sympathetic and serve me better than any other cook. Well, in spite of all his well-meant efforts, the Punjab government refused to lodge me in one of their prisons. They did send me a cook from Punjab prison, but this man did not know anything about cooking and he was a TB patient. The intention obviously was that I too would catch the infection. From Sabarmati, I was transferred to a district prison of Bareilly. There was a central jail too at Bareilly, and if only I had been transferred there, I would have had the company of other political prisoners. But the authorities did not want me to have that little consolation, and they kept me away from their prisoners. The day came when Dr. Khan Sahib was elected to the Central Assembly and he was allowed to go to the frontier province again. He and his wife came to see me at Bareilly. The Inspector General of the prisons of this district, Colonel Salamatullah Khan, was a likable person. When he visited the prison, I asked him to help me get rid of the cook. He is not a cook at all, I said. Besides, he is a TB patient and I don't want to get the infection, though perhaps that is why he has been sent to me. But this arrangement does not suit either of us. Please change him. The Inspector General agreed and the cook was transferred. Rafi Ahmad Kidwai came to see me and so did the Minister for Jails. As the summer had started and it was getting warm, the minister suggested that I be transferred to a cooler place. But during the long summer, the government took no steps to transfer me. Then when the monsoon set in and everyone returned from the hills, I was sent to Almora. It rained and rained and rained for days at a stretch and it was impossible to go out. At last, the day of my release came, but again I was forbidden to go to the frontier province. So I went back to Varda. That was in 1936. Not until August 1937, when the elections for the Provincial Assembly were over, was I able to return to my province. In 1936, the elections for the Provincial Assembly of the Frontier Province were held and the Khudaidat Khidmatgar Party had won the majority of seats. In spite of that, the government had asked Sir Nawab Sahibzada Abdul Qayyum to form the government. This gentleman would certainly have lost in the elections had he stood as a candidate in his own district, but he was elected from the district of Hazara, where there were very few Khudaidat Khidmatgars. With the help of the government, he formed a government of Hindus, Sikhs, and some independent members. But he did not last long. 5 or 6 months later, he was defeated. In September 1937, the opposition passed a vote of no confidence and then Dr. Khan Sahib formed a government with the help of the Khudaidat Khidmatgars. In this government, Qazi Ataullah Sahib was the Minister of Education. Qazi Sahib first of all made Pashto the compulsory medium of instruction in the schools. This ministry and this government did a great deal for the welfare of the people, but in one respect, it did our movement more harm than good. In actual fact, all the power in the government was vested in the governor and his subordinate officers took no notice of what our ministers said, nor did they give them any help or assistance. They acted on the advice of the governor and did as he told them. We had gained 50 paisa worth of power, but the country needed a whole rupee's worth. And where was the rest of it going to come from? Then the syndicate, that is, monopolies and control system, proved to be a new calamity for the movement as our workers were not able to distribute the controlled goods honestly and fairly. In 1939, the war broke out, and together with the Congress ministries everywhere in India, our ministry also resigned. Civil disobedience. When Japan entered the war, a meeting of the Congress Working Committee was held. At that meeting, a resolution was passed to the effect that we would help Britain in her war effort, but on the condition that Britain would give us our freedom after the war. On the occasion, Mahatma Gandhi and I resigned from the Working Committee because we did not believe in violence, and to help the British in their war effort would mean condoning and promoting violence. After this meeting, individual satyagraha, passive resistance was started in the country, but nobody was allowed to take this course of action without Gandhiji's personal approval. In the case of the Northwest Frontier Province, Gandhiji had transferred this authority to me. The government were not arresting any satyagrahis in Frontier Province. They could not, because they were always proclaiming that they were fighting for this war for the freedom and democracy. They never mentioned the freedom of India, though. Therefore, Congress felt that a mass movement against British rule was called for, and this led Gandhiji to launch the Quit India movement in the August of 1942. This slogan was reverberated all over India and the frontier province. Those who were engaged in individual satyagraha told the people, it is a sin to support the British war effort with either men or money. Don't pay any subscriptions and don't enlist. Through this mass movement, the slogan Quit India reached every British ear. At the same time, thousands of people were courting arrest by breaking British laws. At that time, I founded a Khudai Khidmatkar Center on the back of the Sardar Yab, which was called Markaz-e-Alae Khudai Khidmatkar. In India, civil disobedience had begun, but we had not yet started it in the frontier province. When I decided that we should also launch the civil disobedience movement, our provincial jirga gave me full authority to run the movement, and they made me its dictator. Actually, I shudder at the word dictator because autocracy and dictatorship are not in my nature. They go against my grain. Therefore, I always consulted my colleagues before taking any decisions or sending out instructions for the civil disobedience movement. I should mention here that when the Jirga was discussing whether to start civil disobedience or not, Haji Fakir Khan of Hazara proposed that we should cut telephone wires and remove railway sleepers. I told the Jirga that this would be allowed only on the condition that the saboteur himself went to the police and told them what he had done. This would make him develop moral courage, and this would be an inspiration to other workers. Also, no innocent people would come under the suspicion of the police, and they would not have any excuse for hunting and harassment. So this mass movement was started according to my instructions and carried out with great discipline on the part of the workers. The courts at Bannu, Kohat, Tank and Peshawar were attacked according to the plan. The British response to our movement was certainly severe. But in Peshawar, there was a Muslim deputy commissioner, Janab Iskandar Mirza, who was so loyal to the British and so anxious to follow in their doorsteps and remain in their good books that he became more British than the British as far as cruelty was concerned. When the British gave orders for lathi charge in his district one day, he himself picked up the lathi and rained blows on the backs of the Khudai Dat Khidmatkars till they were half dead. He actually killed the Khudai Khidmatkar Sayyid Akbar. Another of his worthy gentleman's gallant and courageous deeds was that one day he went to the Khudai Khidmatkar camp and put poison into the curry. The Khudai Dat Khidmatkars who ate the curry were all taken seriously ill and escaped death by a hair's breadth. He bestowed many more mercies like that on the Pathans, but I would prefer to draw a veil over them and entrust them to God before whom we shall all appear one day. His be the judgment. Later, Mirza Sahab became the president of Pakistan and he changed his tune to Islam, Islam, and I love thee, my country. And he had me thrown into the prison because I was supposed to be the enemy of the country and anti Islam. I was constantly touring the province to see the progress and the effects of the Satyagraha movement. One day, as I was on my way to Kohat and had come as far as Sapina police station, I was arrested. I was taken to Peshawar by car and there I was released. From then on, whenever I went, I was arrested, taken back to Peshawar and released. I did not care for this kind of game, so I collected a group of 50 men and went on foot from Charsadda to Mardan. We had held meetings in all the villages we passed through. When we arrived at Mirwas Dheri, we found the police waiting for us. We linked our hands together firmly so that it was practically impossible to separate us from each other and marched on. When the police found they could not break this human chain, they brought out their lathis and began to rain blows upon us. Apart from that occasion, the British have always treated me with respect. In spite of the fact that they were hostile and harsh, they had never inflicted any humiliating bodily harm on me. For example, when I was in Aptabad prison, one day the Inspector General, Mr. Smith, came straight to the prison to see me. I had been put in a very small cell all alone. When he had greeted me, he went straight out again and looking very angry at the superintendent, he said, "What kind of a pigeonhole have you put Badshah Khan in? Why don't you give him a large sick room?" The superintendent was very respectfully said, "What could I do? It was the government's order." Mr. Smith there and then telephoned the governor of the frontier province and said, "George Cunningham, is this the way to treat the brave opponent like Badshah Khan?" Sir George Cunningham had the grace to say sorry and to withdraw his orders. But before he did that, Mr. Smith had already issued orders that I was to be transferred to a nicer place and that I was to be given congenial company. As a result, my son Wali and 3 other colleagues were sent to the same prison. I had not asked for this at all. Admittedly, Mr. Smith had tried to find out whom I would like to have for company, but I had replied that I had no preference and that I left it to him. Thereupon, he sent me a message saying, "I'm not looking for company for myself but for you, so it is only right that you should tell me whom you would like. I don't want to impose my choice on you." When I think of Mr. Smith's kindness and broad mindedness, I am sadly reminded of the treatment I used to get from the Pakistan government. Under their rule, I was always kept in solitary confinement, and in spite of all my requests and demands for some company, nobody ever listened to me and lifted a finger to do anything for me. And if by some remote chance they did give me a companion, he would either be mad or suffering from some disease, and it would be a headache rather than a companionship. There were during the British period certain native officers who were laboring under the misapprehension that by inflicting physical harm on me and treating me disrespectfully, they would find favor with the British and gain rewards in some way or the other. During the Mirwas Dheri incident, it was my bad luck to fall into the hands of such a mean police officer. He beat me so severely that 2 of my ribs were broken. He was an inspector of the police called Khushdil Khan. He certainly did not know credit to his name, which means a happy heart. Well, this Khan of Happy Heart may have earned himself a place of honor on the British list of loyalists, but he was not exactly an example of gallantry. My Khudaidat Khidmatkars could have taught him a thing or two about behavior towards opponents. This Khan of the Happy Heart arrested all of us and took us to Mardan prison. The next day we were taken to Risalpur, from where to Haripur prison. Delegation to the tribes. When the Japanese armies reached Burma, we began to worry because they were advancing rapidly, and if they continued at that rate, they might soon invade India. We were especially worried about the tribesmen. We feared that days of trouble lay ahead and wanted to face the challenge together and safeguard our country with patriotic fervor. It was therefore essential to decide upon a united plan of action, and we thought of sending a delegation to the tribal areas to discuss all this. I wrote to Sir George Cunningham, who was the governor of our province, and asked him permission to send such a delegation. Sir George wrote back saying that he could not allow us to send the delegation. We then called a meeting of the Jirga and decided that since this was a matter of life and death for the country, we would send our delegation to the tribal areas, whether the government gave us permission or not. And the governor, after consultation with his political agent, decided that nothing would be said and no action would be taken until we actually entered the tribal area. We sent the delegation to the Afridis, the Waziris, the Masouds, and to Bajor. The delegation to the Afridis reached its destination without any trouble at all. But the Khudaidat Khidmatgars, who constituted the delegation to Bajor, had to face great difficulties. The political agent in Malakand had posted Khans of the Ranazai tribe along the way. When our men reached Sakha court, they were stopped by the Khans, who advised them to go back as they said they would not on any account allow them to enter their district. The leader of the delegation, Kamdar Khan, told the Khans, "We are the Khudaidat Khidmatgars and we have come here because our country may have to face grave trouble very soon. We want to sit down with you and discuss what is to be done." But the Khan Sahibs turned a deaf ear to their explanations and requests. They had only one answer, and that was no. After all that, they had been sent by the political agent and they owed loyalty to him alone. Then Kamdar Khan told them that once a Khudaidat Khidmatgar had taken a step, he could not retrace it. An argument developed and soon a crowd had collected. The Khan Sahibs had intended to drive the Khudaidat Khidmatgars out of their district by force. But when they realized that the public sympathized with the Khudaidat Khidmatgars and would certainly put up a fight if any obstacle was put in their way, they let them go. Afterwards, the Khans came to see me at the center and we had a long, serious discussion about love, brotherhood, and patriotism. The Khans begged me to ask the Khudaidat Khidmatgars to avoid the road from Malakand to Bajor and to go by some other route. So I wrote to Kamdar Khan and asked him not to use the Malakand road and go to Bajor by the longer Uthman Khail road. This he did, and the delegation proceeded via Agra towards Usman Khail. On the way, they were stopped again by the Mias of Kaka Khail tribe. When the Khudaidat Khidmatgars were passing through a Mayan village, and all the people came out and charged upon them for no apparent reason. They picked up the Khudaidat Khidmatgars, threw them on the road and beat them up mercilessly. They hoped that the political agent would come to know that they had taught the Khudaidat Khidmatgars a good lesson. The people of the Kaka Khel had been always very loyal to the government of the day, so much so that they used to march in front of the British armies as far as Chitral and loot whatever they could. When at last the delegation reached Bajor, Badshah Gul created a lot of trouble for them there. He spread the rumor that the red shirts had arrived in the town were Hindus and that God would reward anyone who killed them. Badshah Gul was doing this at the instigation of Hasham Khan, who was the Prime Minister of Afghanistan at that time. The British expected Hasham Khan to do things like this for them, and Badshah Gul was Hasham Khan's man. On one occasion, the village youth of Bajor district had a wonderful idea. They thought they would use Khudaidat Khidmatgars for target practice, but the elders forbade them to do this. "Take it easy," they said. "These red shirts aren't going anywhere, are they? Let's go and ask them." They went to see the Khudaidat Khidmatgars in the Hujra and asked them who they were and where they wanted to go. Malik Ustad, who was one of the greatest Pathan poets, stood up and replied, "We are your brothers, we are the Khudaidat Khidmatgars, servants of God. Badshah Khan has sent us to you to tell you that our country will have to face grave danger soon. It will be like a mighty flood. He wants us to tell all the Pakhtuns to be prepared lest they are swept away in the flood." Abdul Malik's word made a deep impression on the people, and they reprimanded the young men severely. In spite of all the Badshah Gul's opposition, the Khudaidat Khidmatgars now became a great success in Bajor, and they did some really good work there. This was not the end of Hasham Khan's hostility, however. When we were carrying out raids on the British courts, Hasham Khan sent the same Badshah Gul and one Haji Muhammad Amin to Peshawar to work against us. I should mention that Haji Muhammad Amin lived in a village called Ada near Jalalabad in Afghanistan, and that one time he was Haji Sahab of Tarangzai's Khilafa. To please the British, Hasham Khan had sent him to Peshawar to divert the Pakhtun's attention from the British. When Haji Muhammad Amin arrived in Peshawar and found the Khudaidat Khidmatgars carrying out raids on the British courts, he created news by raiding the brothels. His sole purpose was to divert the people's attention from the British and their misdeeds. But neither he nor anybody else could divert the people's attention from the struggle for freedom anymore, for we had worked everywhere among the Pathans, and they had now began to think for themselves. It was impossible to mislead them or to deceive the people in the name of Islam anymore. Badshah Gul's father, Haji Sahab of Tarangzai, was a very nice man, a true friend and a colleague of mine. As for Badshah Gul, it was the lust for power and greed for money that made him create all those difficulties for us. Division amongst the Pathans. Thousands of my colleagues were detained in Haripur Hazara Central Jail. When many of them had been released and only a few prisoners were left, I was sent back there. Several of us were under strict surveillance. I decided that instead of sitting idle, I should do some work, and so I requested the government to put me on tape weaving. In those days, weavers were paid 50 paisas per 25 feet of tape. Many of my colleagues made a nice little income that way, but not one of them used his earnings for himself. Every pea was sent to our center. Weaving was not the only thing we did. Many of the Khudaidat Khidmatkars who were in prison here were illiterate, and I made arrangements to have them taught reading and writing. Quite a few of them were literate when they were released. It occurs to me that I ought to say something about the agencies. I have already mentioned the method by which Pathan country was divided, first by the British and now by Pakistan. But I will not dwell upon this abominable division and only deal with the agencies now. Those districts of the northwest frontier province, which were legislatively governed by an assembly, though actually by the governor, are called settled districts. Between these and the independent tribal districts, there is a buffer zone, the agencies. They come under the direct rule of a political agent. They have no laws, no courts. There is no appeal against the political agent's order. The unfortunate inhabitants of the agencies are kept illiterate and ignorant. They are oppressed and tyrannized to such an extent that their life and death are in the hands of one single individual. On the other hand, they are allowed to possess guns and rifles. They also have freedom to kill each other, to steal, and to remain lifelong enemies. Thus, they are forever kept under the thumb of the political agent. They live in constant danger to their lives and suffer humiliation to save themselves. The purpose of the buffer zone is that in the event of an attack on the settled districts from the tribal areas, the attacker will pass through the agencies and the first blows will fall on the people who live there. These people are not free like the independent tribes. They are poor and oppressed, and they live and die at the political agent's pleasure. They do not have regular laws or law courts like other subjected areas. At first, the British Army and British Border Police were always posted there. Now it is the Pakistan Army. While I I was in prison, I kept hens, sold the eggs, and sent the proceeds to our center. I used to feed the chickens myself. When I called them at feeding time, they would come scurrying, and soon they would be all over me, on my lap, on my shoulders, on my head, and on my arms, eating out of my hand the grain I had brought. One day, Colonel Smith, the Inspector General, visited Haripur prison. He was the same Colonel Smith who, in 1930, then the superintendent of the prison in Haripur, had treated the political prisoners with utmost severity and cruelty. But he had had a change of heart, and he was now a nice man, and very friendly with me. Actually, the British are a brave and patriotic nation, and they value patriotism and courage in others. When Colonel Smith saw me feeding the chickens, he took leave from his companions and came and stood quietly behind me, watching the performance. After a while, he said, "Good morning." When I looked round, he said, "What are you up to?" I said that there is a great lesson here for mankind. Look at these chickens. They know very well that I am really their enemy, and that I rear them now only to slaughter them later. But because I love them and treat them with love, they are not afraid of me, and they sit on my head and on my shoulders. Is this not a great lesson for mankind? If through love we can make animals our friends, why can't we make human beings, the crown of creation, our friends too? Mr. Smith was an odd person. He always used to say that if ever Pakistan came into existence, he would not stay in the country even for a day. And sure enough, when Pakistan was established, he took the first train and went back to England. In 1945, our ministries thought that our province ought to have its own ministry. If we could form a ministry, apart from giving us the other advantages, it would benefit our fellow political prisoners who have spent 3 years in prisons, could be released. A delegation was sent to Gandhiji to explain to him that conditions in India were different from the conditions in the frontier province. Gandhiji said he agreed with that, what they said about the release of the prisoners, but he also told them to consult me. So a one-man delegation was sent to me in prison. He reported to me that Gandhiji had said that, and he also told me that the British would never release me. If, however, they could form a ministry, they could release all the Khudaidad Khidmatkars. But he could not convince me. I told him not to worry about us, the political prisoners. I said that, in my opinion, a ministry had no real power, would do more harm than good. My advice was against forming a ministry, but perhaps other counsel prevailed, for in March 1945, a ministry was formed and political prisoners were released. As soon as I was free, I resumed my work through the government. Though the government soon put its machinery into action and did all that it could to obstruct my work. Actually, the Aurangzeb Khan ministry was a blessing in disguise for us, for it made people realize how little the Muslim League ministry did for them and how much the Congress or Khudaidat Khidmatkar ministry did for the common man. Aurangzeb had not been able to do anything for the people. He just did what the British told him to do and what was in his own interest. But later, the ministry of Dr. Khan Sahib did a great deal for the welfare of the people, in spite of the fact that it did not have full authority. The most important thing was that they were not the puppets of the British. Their love and sympathy was for their own people. Elections and referendum. I was not in favor of the elections of 1945-46. I thought that even if we won the elections, what good would it do if we could not work for the people? After all, we did not want to win the elections or to form a ministry for the sake of ruling over the people, but for the sake of serving them. I attended the meeting of the Congress Working Committee and of the Parliamentary Board in Calcutta. After I had reported to Gandhiji on the events and conditions of the frontier province, I told him that I did not want to take part in the elections. Gandhiji agreed with me. The Parliamentary Board tried hard to make me change my mind, but they did not succeed. After the meeting of the working committee was over, I returned to my village and continued my work. For though I did not want to take part in the election campaign, I hardly wanted to sit home and be idle. I was soon absorbed in our movement again and I started touring the province. That also gave me a chance to study the government machinery that had been put into operation against me. I found out that the government had closed Islamia College at Peshawar as well as other schools and colleges all over the province, and that the students were being made to canvass votes for the Muslim League. I saw British ladies going around canvassing too. They would go to the people's house and cleverly making use of the custom of exchanging scarves when greeting a visitor, they would say, I have come to visit you, so you must give me a dupatta, a scarf. But the dupatta I want is your vote. The daughter of Begum Shahbaz too had come from Punjab with a group of girls to work in the election campaign. Large number of students from Aligarh Muslim University and from Islamia College, Calcutta, and workers and leaders of the Muslim League from many different parts of India had been brought to the frontier province. And the government and the Muslim League had also recruited religious leaders from Punjab and the frontier province to work in this election campaign. When I saw how hard and how enthusiastically these Britishers and their wives were working on behalf of the Muslim League, I changed my mind and decided that I would also take part in the campaign. There was only 1 month to go before the elections. The issue at stake in this election of 1946, the last general election in the United India, was India or Pakistan, Hindu or Muslim, Islam or Kufr, temple or mosque. The Muslim League canvassers asked people, are you giving your vote to the mosque or to the temple? Unlike the other Muslims in India, however, the Pathans were politically awake. They had the perception and nobody could mislead them in the name of Islam. They knew the real meaning of Islam. They had learned this in their nationalist movement. They had learned to make sacrifices to serve their country. Nowhere else in India had the Muslims participated in this kind of nationalist movement. The polling day came. The British went all out to help the Muslim League and hindered the Khudaidat Khidmatkars. But by the grace of God, the Muslim League was defeated and we won the elections with a large majority. The government and its machinery had done everything to stop us from winning the elections. We considered this to be so unbecoming on their part that after we had discussed it amongst ourselves, we decided that we could not, under these circumstances, form a ministry. In our refusal to form a ministry, we said that we would be prepared to form a ministry only on the condition that we would take action and punish those government officers who, in contradiction to the service rules and regulations, had worked against us in the elections. When Dr. Khan Sahib learnt what we had decided, he sent a word to Sardar Patel because, in his opinion, we ought to form the ministry. Sardar Patel sent Maulana Abul Kalam Azad to the frontier province to help us solve the problem. We held a meeting in Peshawar and we told Maulana Azad frankly that we were not prepared to form a ministry unless the government agreed to our conditions. Then Maulana Sahib went to Delhi and returned with a letter from the Viceroy which said, in rather vague terms, that the government agreed to our conditions. After due consultation with our colleagues, we decided to form a ministry, but we stipulated that all authority should be in the hands of the Central Committee. In 1946, Maulana Azad and I were elected by the Khudaidat Khidmatkar and the Frontier Assembly to be members of the Central Assembly, the purpose of which was to give the India a constitution. There were 3 members of the frontier province, Maulana Azad, myself, and the third was a resident of Hazara district, where the Muslim League had been active and its candidate had won the elections. The fact that we had been secured such a clear majority in an election which was fought on very clear issues and under conditions in which the government had allied itself with the Muslim League and had used all the Muslim League leaders in India and all its power against us, could only mean one thing, that the majority of the people in the country were behind us. When, therefore, in spite of all this, another referendum, that is in the partition of India, in 1947 was forced upon us, we considered this gross injustice and refused to have anything to do with such a referendum. We decided to boycott it so that the world might learn of the gross injustice that was to be inflicted upon us. Not only was the Viceroy's order for a new referendum illogical and unreasonable, but it was also discriminating and partial. If the British meant this to be their parting gift to us, we did not accept it. Whereas everywhere in India, the representative assemblies had been taken to decide whether they wanted to remain in India or to go over to Pakistan. The Northwest Frontier Province Assembly had not been given this right to choose. This was an insult to the whole nation of Pashtuns, which we could not under any circumstances tolerate. I must confess that it also hurt and grieved me deeply that even the Congress Working Committee did not lift a finger to help us as we had hoped they would. Tied hand and foot, they delivered us into the hands of our enemies. The Congress Working Committee did not show the same indifference and callousness in case of Assam when the Chief Minister Gopinath Bardolai refused to recognize the grouping clause Cripps Lawrence plan in 1946. Then the Congress Working Committee spoke up and supported this stand. Personally, I was not against the grouping clause. When Gandhiji asked me why not, I said that I considered any scheme better than the partition of the country. Under these circumstances and after such treatment by the Congress, the question whether I wanted to remain in India or go over to Pakistan is not only unnecessary but improper because the Congress, which was the representative body in India, not only deserted us but delivered us into the hands of our enemies. To meet them now is like killing all my Pathan self respect, ethics, and traditions. As to our attitude towards Pakistan, it is no longer in question. It was the issue on which we fought the Muslim leagues in the elections in our province, and there is no point in breaking my head over it now. The demand I made was that if a referendum was to be held at all, it should be a referendum on the question of Pakhtunistan or Pakistan. But nobody listened to me, and the referendum was forced upon us. As we refused to take part in the referendum, the way was clear for the Muslim League, and they used all the cunning, deceit, and force they could command. In spite of all that they got, they got only 50% of the votes, which is nowhere enough to decide the fate of the country or a nation. The British, who ought to have remained neutral in this referendum, as it behoves a just and honest government, openly had the police and the army canvass for votes. They also posted police and army personnel at polling booths and even forged the signatures of people who did not want to take part in the referendum. In 1958, when I was in the central prison of Haripur Hazara, one of my fellow prisoners, Colonel Bashir, told me that the following story in connection with the referendum. He was in the army and he and his company were stationed in Lithambar near Bannu. On the day of the referendum, he told me that he had taken his company out to the polling booths 3 times so that the soldiers could register forged votes in favor of Pakistan. Afterwards, he had been given a senior post in the intelligence department and later pensioned off. Then he had committed some offense and had been sentenced to 2 years imprisonment, and we happened to be in the same prison. Because the red shirts, the Khudai Khidmatgars, refused to take part in this referendum, the government servants and their henchmen, the Muslim League, registered thousands of false votes in their names. Even the name of Khan Amir Muhammad Khan had, as I had already suspected, been falsely registered. The Cabinet Mission. The Muslim League had boycotted the Indian Constituent Assembly. I had discussed this question at length with the Muslim members, and I had told them that they should cooperate with the assembly and proposed to make India a democratic republic. If the Hindus agree to this, we will join the federation, and if they do not agree, our province will leave the federation. I would then be in favor of seceding from the federation and making our province into a sovereign state. But the Muslims had been misled to such an extent that they would not listen to anything or anybody. They had only one answer: you have become a Hindu. Meanwhile, a cabinet mission under the leadership of Lord Patrick Lawrence had arrived from London. I was a member of the Indian delegation that was to have discussions with the cabinet mission. There were four of us Congress members: Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, Jawaharlal ji, Sardar Patel, and myself. There were four Muslim League members too: Jinnah, Liaquat Ali, Nawab Ismail, and Abdul Rab Nishtar. We started our discussions at Simla. When we discussed the agenda for the second day of the conference, we said that the first of all, we would like to know whether the British government was prepared to give India her freedom and withdraw her troops or not. We do not want to get so involved in discussing other topics, we said, that we lose sight of the real object. So the next day at the conference, Jawaharlal Nehru asked those two questions. The Viceroy, Lord Wavell, said to Panditji, "We are certainly leaving India, but in whose charge shall we give her? Have you decided that?" Jawaharlal ji replied, "You may give her to the Muslim League if you like, as long as you go." That impressed Mr. Jinnah too, and he said, "Very well, we should discuss this in private." Then the meeting adjourned. Jinnah Sahib and Jawaharlal ji got up and went into the next room. They emerged after a couple of hours. They had decided that a three-man committee should be appointed, of which one was to be a Congress leader, one a Muslim leader, and the head of the committee should be someone acceptable to the both of them. Any decision we took unanimously would stand, and in case of any difference of opinion, this committee of three would give the final decision. We were given 2 days to select such a committee. On the third day, when we met for our discussion, Lord Patrick Lawrence, who was an extremely nice and gentle Englishman, asked Jinnah what we had decided. Jinnah denied the whole thing. I beckoned Nishtar Sahib to come over to me, and I asked him to beg Jinnah Sahib not to spoil everything now, because Gandhiji had told my Congress colleagues in my presence to grant the Muslims all that they've asked for, provided their request was unanimous. Nishtar Sahib went and stood behind Jinnah's chair, and Jinnah took no notice of him. Nishtar Sahib remained standing there for a few minutes, and then he resumed his seat. Thus, the whole affair was spoiled. In actual fact, British never wanted to see harmony and concord between the Hindus and the Muslims, and they were determined to divide the country. When it became evident that no agreement could be reached between the Congress and Muslim League, the cabinet mission took its own decision. Having announced its plans, the mission returned to London. The Viceroy formed an interim government, and the British Parliament announced that the British would leave India in 6 months' time. Jawaharlal's visit to the frontiers. Because of some differences of opinion, the Congress refused to have anything to do with the formation of the interim government. The Muslim League decided that in that case they would do so, but the Viceroy would not give them permission. In the end, Congress agreed to form the interim government. When this government had been established, I told Jawaharlal ji that millions of rupees were being spent on the tribal areas of the northwest frontier province, but that the people themselves derived no benefit at all from this heavy expenditure. All the money was spent by the British, the tribal chiefs, and the maliks and their servants. We are in authority now, I told Jawaharlal ji. So why don't you come and see those poor tribal areas for yourself? Come and meet the people. They are so poor and so oppressed, but you will love them. They live among the barren mountains and have no earthly possessions. If something, however little, could be done to enable them to earn a living, if there could be schools for their children, they would be filled with new hope and courage, and all the troubles that arise from time to time would stop. Jawaharlal agreed with me and promised that he would visit the tribal areas as soon as possible and see what could be done for the people. But when he was ready to go, the viceroy would not give him permission. But I have promised, Jawaharlal told the viceroy, and I want to go. The viceroy realized that Jawaharlal was determined to go, permission or no permission. So he did not say anything more about it, but he instructed the governor of the frontier province, Sir Olaf Caro, to deal with Jawaharlal ji. This governor was a sworn enemy of the Khudaidat Khidmatkar movement and a great friend of the Muslim League. He went to Delhi and spent 3 days with Jawaharlal, trying to dissuade him from going, but Jawaharlal was determined. When he returned from Delhi, Sir Olaf instructed all the political agents to put as many obstacles in Nehru's way as possible. When Nehru arrived, we set out on our tour of the tribal areas. We encountered innumerable difficulties on the way, and we knew that they were all the governor's doing. We first of all went to Waziristan. All the political agents there were British. They were most courteous and they put all kinds of obstacles in our way in the most polite manner. They mobilized hostile demonstrations. When we met the Minaran Shah Jirga and I was about to address them, the whole Jirga stood up as one man and started shouting that they did not want a Hindu government. When we arrived at Razmak, the same thing happened. Then we went to Vana and the whole performance was repeated there too. When we returned to Miransha and met all the political agents as well as the residents, Nehru asked them what benefit the common people had derived from all the millions of rupees that they had been spent on the tribal areas. Nobody replied. I said, but they have done so much for the Pathans. The British officers looked pleased. Yes, I continued, they have managed to demoralize the Pathans and they have made them so money minded that if you show a Pathan a handful of money, he will throw away his country, his religion, and his community. They mean nothing to him anymore. All this will pass away, he will say, but money remains forever. The British officers no longer looked pleased. When we all sat down to eat, a young British officer from Vana said to me, so according to you, we have done nothing for this country. I replied, of your own accord, you have done nothing. If you think you have done any good anywhere, kindly show me what and where.